Hello, everyone. My name's Tori, and I was half paralyzed 6 months ago. I went from an elite athlete to being entirely half paralyzed on the left side of my body. But this wasn't the first time I suffered from decompression sickness, and that's why we're going to talk about dehydration and how it led to the second time it happened. I had lost the ability to speak, all because I didn't have drinking water. Seems so basic, so simple, but it can be the difference between a safe dive and a life-threatening emergency. Imagine this. You've been floating in the water, the sun is blazing, you're focused on the dive ahead. And in all that time, you haven't taken a single drop of drinking water. The dive feels perfect. In fact, the best to date at that depth. But 10 minutes later, your body tells you something's wrong. Your arms feel heavy, you feel a little bit lightheaded, and suddenly, you can't even speak. Dehydration isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. It changes how your body processes nitrogen and it slows your recovery. And it can trigger decompression sickness even on a seemingly flawless dive. Today, we're diving into the risks of dehydration, why it's one of the most overlooked dangers for freedivers, and how it nearly cost me everything. Let's get into it. Before we dive in, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. It's very small. Every little bit counts. As far as I know, I'm only one of 2, maybe 3 people that have experienced decompression sickness at this level. And I'm definitely the only one documenting it from start to finish. So if you want to be part of this unique comeback story, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you enjoy the video, be sure to give it a like later on. Now let's get back to it. It's one of the most dangerous mistakes and simple mistakes any freediver can make. And it's so easy to overlook. I thought I was just resting, floating on the water, waiting for my turn to dive on the platform. Now, I wasn't incredibly thirsty, but before I knew it, it had been a few hours. I didn't realize I was setting myself up for disaster. I had 2 days of rest leading into this dive. The dive itself felt perfect, but 10 minutes later, everything changed. I couldn't speak, I could barely move, and if someone hadn't noticed, things could have ended very differently. Dehydration doesn't just make you tired. It messes with your body's ability to process nitrogen and avoid decompression sickness. I learned this lesson the hard way, and I want to make sure you don't have to. Okay, now story time. Now, what exactly happened during the second time when I suffered from decompression sickness? When I first arrived at Vertical Blue Training 2022, I arrived not as a competitor, but just as an athlete that wanted to train. So when a line developed midday during the training session, I stepped out of line to let the actual competitors do their thing. I myself wasn't competing, and the next competition I would do was about 2 months away. I felt very selfish sitting in line ahead of people that were actually competing the next week. Before I knew it, I had been baking in the Bohemian sun for hours without a drop of drinking water. Now, I didn't feel entirely dehydrated. Also, when I arrived at Vertical Blue Training, I remember looking at the platform and looking at where the oxygen is and thinking, wow, that's not really that far, but that's really freaking far. But I don't want to be a nuisance. It was my first time there and I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. Now, I had already experienced decompression sickness once. I totally should have said something, but I didn't. I would later come to regret that decision. So I did my dive, and it was the most comfortable 100-meter dive I had ever done up until that point. After my dive, somebody else was already using the oxygen. You see, in Vertical Blue Training, there's 2 platforms, and so 2 different people could dive at basically the same time. I didn't coordinate it well enough so that the oxygen was ready for me right after my dive. That was a big mistake on my part. Easily preventable, my fault. I could have done better. However, at the time, I was like, it's fine, I don't need it. I mean, there was a time in diving when I wanted to be like one of those Sherpas climbing Everest that didn't need oxygen, but I'm not one of those guys. So as I waited on the platform and waited for my turn to use the oxygen, I started to realize how tired I was. But there were still no red flags just yet. I remember seeing that person come up from using the oxygen and thinking to myself, okay, it's my turn, I gotta swim over there. So I flopped into the water and I started to swim over, and then I realized I wasn't gonna make it. So I turned around and I head back to the platform because I was closer to the platform than I was the shore. I got to the platform, I put my arm up, and I kind of rolled on like an old man. I was like, wow, that was a lot harder than it should have been. I didn't really understand what was happening to me. I just thought I was really tired. And lucky for me, there was still one last competitor that was competing in the competition next week, still on the platform. He was the last dive of the day. He had just finished. He saw me struggling to get onto the platform. I mean, it was a lot harder than normal for me to get on that platform. I rolled on and he was like, are you okay? And I avoided eye contact because I was kind of ashamed of how tired I was. Didn't make sense to me. I must not want to answer this guy because I'm tired. And then he said, "Are you okay?" He said it the second time. And I still avoided eye contact. I still ignored him. I was like, wow, I must be pretty damn tired. And then he said a third time, much louder. He said, "Are you okay?" And I still didn't answer the guy. I avoided the eye contact. I just went about my business, which wasn't much. I was just trying to recover, really. Then he came over and got right in my face. And he said, "Are you okay?" Oh my God. I can't even answer this guy if I try. It was then I realized there was something really, really wrong. And he also realized it. It was pretty obvious at that point. I could not answer this person. So he waved his hand to the people on shore that were packing up the oxygen. Everybody rushed to my rescue. They got to the platform. And the funny thing is, people started explaining to me who I was, where I was, what I was doing. They were like, "Your name's Tori. You're in the Bahamas. You're at Vertical Blue training." I'm like rolling my eyes. I'm like, I know this, but I can't tell them I know this. It was very frustrating. Nevertheless, they got the oxygen in my mouth. They brought it to the platform. They put the oxygen in my mouth. I took a few swigs, then they got me into the water. They towed me over to the regular recompression area at Vertical Blue, and my left side was starting to get weak. I definitely couldn't talk, but I had a good right side, and so I started pulling down the rope with the regulator in my mouth, started pulling down, and the second I got underwater, even a few meters, like just 1 or 2 meters, breathing the 100% oxygen, the symptoms started to alleviate almost immediately. I stayed underwater for about 15 to 20 minutes at 5 to 7 meters. When I came up, all of the DCS symptoms had been alleviated and permanently. Now, there's some mitigating factors that contributed to this before the dive and after the dive, and I want to make a big, clear distinction between the two. The biggest thing that caused the onset, in my opinion and in my experience, is I was floating in the water for at least 2 hours without a drop of drinking water, under the Bohemian sun, waiting for my turn to dive, because I was stepping out of the queue of the line. Being polite or considerate, it can bite you in the butt sometimes. These are very easy things to overlook, but also very easy things to fix. But the post-dive precautions that I learned on this occasion is make sure it's nearby, within reach. And if not, at least make sure somebody's not going to be using it when you need it. There's things I can take responsibility for, and there's things other people can take responsibility for. On this occasion, I could have taken responsibility for everything. When I first arrived at Vertical Blue and I saw the distance between the platform and the oxygen, whether they could change that for me or not, I should have been a nuisance. In freediving, if you have a history, even if it's brief, of DCS, you have a right to be a nuisance. And I learned that the hard way on this occasion. So thanks for stopping by, listening to my story. If you're interested in the repercussions of what happened to me after the last incident, click on the video below or over here or over here. I recently made a video about my third encounter with decompression sickness, and it was a doozy. I only overlooked one very small critical mistake. In fact, there were 2 small critical mistakes I made that most people would probably overlook, like blindly trusting the first hospital that you go to. Well, if you made it all the way to the end, you must be really interested in decompression sickness. Now, this wasn't the first time I experienced DCS, and it wasn't the last. On each occasion, I learned something very new, and it's clear to me that there's so much more to share on this topic. That's why I'm going to keep releasing videos on a weekly basis. Each one will dive deeper into what I've learned from my experience with DCS. If you have any questions, concerns, or ideas about the topic, type them in the comments. I'll do my best to include it in the next video. Until then, don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you learned something.